Todd, what about you? Biggest question mark you think the Mets are facing this offseason?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I think it's going to be active, and I think this team's got a lot. They're already starting to reshuffle when you saw the moves made on the coaching staff. So the biggest question, I think, is Pete Alonso going to come back? I don't necessarily think that's the biggest need they have to address, but I do think it's the biggest question because that one is emotional. The fans have a lot to say about that as well, and there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not Pete is going to want more years than the Mets are willing or want to be able to go. And at the end of the day, there's going to be a huge PR issue, I think, if they don't have the polar bear back in a Mets uniform. So to me, that's the biggest question. It still, as I said, is not necessarily the biggest need they have to address.
That is the biggest question. Whenever we go anywhere, we were together last night, everybody asks, is Pete Alonso going to come back this year? So when it comes to Edwin Diaz, Ken Rosenthal reporting he's seeking a contract similar to his record-breaking 5-year, $102 million deal that he signed after the 2022 season. Do you think, Jim, that is realistic for Edwin?
I mean, listen, I think it's realistic just because of the season that he's had. He's the type of pitcher that he's been. Obviously, the Mets, when we're talking about runs allowed, that's their big, one of the terms that we keep hearing. He has to be a big part of that. And to get him back, I think you're going to have to overpay him. Now, the interesting part of it, it's a little different. The market from when it was a couple years ago, he was in the middle of his prime. Now he's a little bit older. If you look at 32 years old, which is he'll pitch at next year, not a lot of 31, 32-year-olds get 5-year deals. Most of them get 4-year deals. I think that's the range. And David Stearns is really good at holding the line and negotiating and still getting what he wants. So I think that, to me, is the big question. Does he get 4 years? Does he get 5 years? If he gets 5, he's going to be a Met. If it's 4, then other teams are going to be jumping in that need that type of closer, like the Dodgers and others.
I think you're right about the fact that David Stearns is pretty good on holding the line when it comes to not giving out long-term contracts to relievers, somebody even like Edwin Diaz. But how can, Liz, Edwin change that equation?
Yeah, I think that at this point, we know that David is very disciplined and he doesn't do things that, push anything too far. But I think that him and Steve have probably had a conversation at this point about when are we staying within those lines and when do we actually have to go and spend and use those resources in free agency, knowing that free agency, you're always overpaying. So I think that this could be a case for that, especially because Edwin Diaz is essentially in a tier on his own. I kept trying to convince myself that relief pitchers, closers are in kind of like 1A, 1B. To me, no. Edwin is 1. Everybody else is B.
This is Andy Martino right now. He joins us from the GA meetings out in Las Vegas. And, Andy, let's begin here on Pete Alonso. Why do you think this offseason could be different for Pete?
I think it could be a little different, Gary, because he doesn't have the qualifying offer attached. Scott Boras makes this point emphatically, generally about the QO, that it's not unrestricted free agency. There's a significant drag on players' markets. And Boris is right about that. But having said that, Alonso's also a year older. And we're going to see. A lot of the discussion here has been, will a team give him 4 or 5 years? And you're wondering, you certainly hear a lot of smoke on the Red Sox being a team that might be motivated to get Alonso. But what does motivated actually mean? Will they give him 5? We don't know exactly where the Mets are, how far they're willing to stretch. I'd be very, very surprised if the Mets gave him 5 years. So when we talk about how different this offseason is, I still think you're looking at clubs that see Alonso as a 3 or 4 year commitment. And the one thing that potentially could be different, Gary, is does a team come out to get a little irrational just to land this player, whether it's the Red Sox or some wild card like I'm just going to throw out the Rockies, the Rays, teams you don't anticipate. That would remind me of, this is a long time ago, but when Jason Worth signed with the Nationals in 2011, you're like, oh, the Nationals, really? I could see Pete going to a team like that. You're like, those guys just gave him 6 years? All right, bye, Pete. That's kind of how it could be different.
All right, we shall see here. Again, just the beginning of the offseason. What about the high-end pitching market? We expect, Andy, the Mets to be shopping there. How do you expect it to play out?
Yeah, so that's gone from an abstract desire, Gary, to taking the first forms of having some things to say about that and understand both from the Mets standpoint and what we can report on it. So we knew that coming out of the season, they wanted to impact the very top of that rotation and improve that. So now looking through some options. You can dream on Paul Skeens, but they know that Paul Skeens is not going to be available in a trade. So you move on from that. Tarek Skubal is somebody who they're certainly going to, and I would expect already have checked in with the Tigers about, but now it's getting a perception is forming early on that maybe the Tigers will hold Skubal. So you look at a guy like Freddie Peralta with the Brewers, who I know you're going to talk about later in the show, and I think that Peralta is still somebody to keep an eye on. But being on the ground here at the GM meetings today, Gary, the word in the industry, teams that are talking to the Brewers are saying, I really think they're going to hold on to Peralta and not move him. So where the Mets are at right now is just moving through these different options, seeing what's possible, and going from there. It's not an easy thing to try to get somebody's ace from them, and that's the process of what the Mets are in the early stages of trying to figure out how to do.
One of the things the Mets do have, though, Andy, they've got prospects this year. The question is, how many will it take to get a top line and a front line pitcher in a trade? We'll see. Back to you in a moment, Andy. We're just getting going here.